You might be getting manipulated every single day, and you don't even realize it. There are silent yet extremely powerful techniques being used by people around you, leaders, companies, digital influencers, politicians, and even those close to you, like friends or family. These people, whether consciously or not, use strategies that were created over 500 years ago, inspired by the ideas of Niccolo Machiavelli, a man who believed that controlling people was the key to maintaining power. These Machiavellian techniques don't shout, hit, or threaten. They operate quietly, slipping into your mind, influencing your decisions, your feelings, and even your sense of right and wrong. The scariest part is that this happens every day, so naturally that you don't even notice it. But today, you're going to see the truth behind the manipulation, and once you do, you'll never look at the world the same way again. Oh, and before we continue, take a second to check if the notification bell on this channel is turned on. That way, you won't miss any important content like this. Now pay close attention, because what comes next might explain a lot of things that have already happened to you, and maybe you never understood why. These are some of the most dangerous and common Machiavellian techniques being used today to manipulate people without them even realizing it. And the scariest part is that many times the person using these tactics doesn't even seem malicious. It could be someone close to you, someone charismatic, someone you admire. But behind the charming words, they use coldly calculated strategies to control your mind, your emotions, and even your behavior. Let's start with one of the most dangerous: gaslighting. This technique makes you doubt your own sanity. The manipulator distorts facts, denies things that actually happened, and makes you believe you're overreacting or going crazy. Little by little, you lose confidence in yourself and begin to depend on the version of reality that they impose on you. Then there's mirroring. This one is sneaky. The person starts imitating your tastes, your way of speaking, your opinions, and even your emotions. It creates an artificial and quick connection. You think, wow, we understand each other so well, when in reality, it's calculated to make you trust them as quickly as possible. It's a way to disarm your mind and make you more vulnerable to their influence. Another widely used method is triangulation. Here, the manipulator brings a third person into the conversation or situation, creating comparisons, conflicts, or jealousy. This causes emotional confusion and makes you compete for attention, validation, or even affection. Meanwhile, the manipulator remains in control, watching and guiding everything as if it were a game. There's also what we call strategic silence. That's when the person purposely stops talking to you, ignores you, or disappears without explanation. This isn't just emotional coldness. It's a form of psychological punishment. The goal is to make you anxious, insecure, and fearful that you did something wrong. That way, you try harder to please and regain the person's attention, and they gain even more control over you. And we can't forget about false empathy. This might be one of the most deceitful tactics. The Machiavellian manipulator pretends to care, to understand your pain, to want to help you. But it's all a trap. At the right moment, they'll use that information against you. The empathy is just bait to make you open up and become easier to manipulate. Have you ever gone through something like this, only to realize later that you were being manipulated? Which of these techniques hit you the hardest? Was it the silence, the false empathy, or that mirroring that felt like a connection but was just manipulation? Sharing this might be painful, but it can also be liberating. Open up in the comments. These are real Machiavellian manipulation techniques, designed to seem harmless, but extremely effective. They're used to control, weaken, divide, and conquer. Niccolo Machiavelli, more than 500 years ago, already said that power wasn't gained through brute force, but through intelligence and manipulation. He believed that to maintain control, one had to understand how people think and act, and use that knowledge to their advantage. That's why his ideas gave birth to the term Machiavellian. And the most terrifying part is that these ideas are still alive today. They're present in abusive relationships, in political speeches, in advertising, on social media, and in so many everyday situations where you feel like you're being pushed to act against your own will, but you don't fully understand why. That's why understanding these Machiavellian tactics is so important. When you know the tools being used against you, you can spot the signs, protect yourself, and make more conscious decisions. You take back control of your mind, your emotions, and your life. These techniques aren't just tricks, they are structured forms of psychological control. They are Machiavellian strategies that manipulate you in a silent, almost invisible, but deeply destructive way. They reveal the darkest side of Machiavellian psychology, a cold, calculated, emotionally distant behavior that serves only self-interest. And now that you know these tools, you've already taken the first step. Information is the key to freedom. And Machiavelli, even as a controversial thinker, gave us the opportunity to see reality more clearly. We just have to be willing to look closely. Stay with me, because in the next parts, we're going to dive into how these tactics are applied in the real world and what you can do to defend yourself from each one of them. Where does all this come from? You might be wondering, how did these tactics come about? Who came up with such cold and calculated ways to manipulate people? It all originates from an old concept called Machiavellianism, which comes from the teachings of Niccolo Machiavelli, a 16th century political thinker. Machiavelli wrote a famous book called The Prince, where he described how leaders could maintain power using manipulation, deception, and emotional control. In Machiavelli's view, it wasn't important to be loved or fair. What really mattered was being effective. He said that if it was necessary to lie, deceive, or manipulate to stay in control, then so be it. For Machiavelli, the ends always justified the means. This way of thinking became known as Machiavellian strategy. And even after more than 500 years, these ideas are still being used, often silently and invisibly. What began as a theory about political power is now found in companies, relationships, social media, influencers, social groups, and even families. The term Machiavellianism has evolved into something much bigger. It defines a behavioral pattern where someone manipulates, fakes emotions, lies easily, all with one clear goal: to gain an advantage over others. And what's even more concerning is that this manipulation doesn't always seem aggressive. It can come disguised as charm, kindness, or exaggerated attention. Today, this psychological pattern is studied under the term Machiavellian psychology. It seeks to understand how these people think, how they develop their strategies, and most importantly, how they manage to influence so many others around them. In many cases, they use the techniques we talked about earlier: gaslighting, mirroring, triangulation, strategic silence, and false empathy. These behaviors are part of a broader pattern known as the Machiavellian personality, a personality that sees everything as a power game, where other people's feelings are disposable pieces. They feel no guilt, no remorse. They're cold, calculating, and always have an agenda behind every gesture. If this content made you see things that once went unnoticed, then it already deserves a like, don't you think? That simple gesture shows it's worth continuing to bring truths like this that few have the courage to talk about. And a warning: this doesn't just happen with major leaders or politicians. Machiavellian behavior can show up in your boss, a co-worker, a romantic partner, or even a close friend. People who use these tactics know how to appear trustworthy, friendly, even charming. But behind that facade, they're always manipulating to gain the upper hand. That's why understanding these strategies is so important, recognizing the signs. of Machiavellian influence may be the only way to protect your mind and emotions. Because when you understand the root of the problem, you also start to regain control of your own life. Machiavelli himself probably never imagined that his ideas would be applied so broadly and by so many people throughout history. But today, more than ever, they're alive and shaping human behavior across countless areas. So, the next time you feel like you're being manipulated, acting against your will, or something seems too perfectly timed, trust your gut. It might just be another modern application of Machiavellian techniques. And remember, understanding the enemy is the first step to freeing yourself from them. The manipulation we discussed earlier is often carried out by individuals who exhibit characteristic traits that define them as having a Machiavellian personality. But how do they dominate conversations, control decisions, and make others act exactly as they want, while still appearing friendly and trustworthy? That happens because these individuals possess clear traits of what we call a Machiavellian personality. These are people who are extremely skilled at hiding their true intentions. On the outside, they may appear to be inspiring leaders, intelligent, kind, or even reliable. But on the inside, they operate with coldness, strategy, and an overwhelming desire for control. People with this profile usually demonstrate an impressive emotional detachment. While most people are affected by feelings, guilt, or empathy, the Machiavellian manipulator acts as if those emotions have been turned off. They don't feel moved by someone else's suffering. The only thing that matters is achieving their goal. In addition, these individuals have great control over their own expressions. They know exactly when to smile, when to show sadness or empathy, even if they don't feel any of it. Everything is calculated. Everything is an act. Every gesture is a move on the board of manipulation. Another common trait of the Machiavellian personality is the ability to lie effortlessly. We're not talking about small, everyday lies, but a true talent for twisting reality, inventing convincing stories, and hiding the truth with mastery. And the worst part, often these lies are told with such confidence that they actually sound like absolute truths. If you're enjoying this content and want to keep learning how to identify and protect yourself from manipulative behavior like this, subscribe to the channel. There's a lot of important stuff coming, and I want you to be ready. Don't miss out. These individuals also show an obsession with power and control. They need to be in charge of everything. Conversations, relationships, environments. They take pleasure in influencing decisions, in watching others follow their lead, even if indirectly. To them, everything is a matter of strategy, of dominance, of winning. This set of behaviors is what we call Machiavellian behavior. A way of acting that may seem harmless at first, but over time reveals its true objective: to manipulate, control, and win, no matter the cost. And what's most frightening is that this behavior often comes camouflaged. The Machiavellian manipulator doesn't show up like an obvious villain. They may be charismatic, attentive, helpful, but behind those qualities is someone who views human relationships as a power game. These ideas didn't just come out of nowhere. They are deeply inspired by the teachings of Niccolo Machiavelli, the author of The Prince. Machiavelli believed that in order to maintain power, one had to be rational, strategic, and above all, effective. He saw no problem in deceiving, manipulating, or even betraying, as long as it ensured control. The famous phrase, "the ends justify the means," perfectly summarizes this way of thinking. Today, what Machiavelli wrote as a political strategy has become a psychological model. Machiavellian psychology studies exactly that, how certain individuals internalize these ideas and begin to use them in their daily lives. Not only in governments, but in companies, relationships, and even within families. These individuals see the world as a game, And in this game, there's no room for feelings, only for victories. They manipulate, distort, stay silent, act with false empathy, all to take control of the situation and ensure that no one sees what's really going on. So here's the question. Could someone around you be showing these traits or worse? Have you ever used some of these tactics yourself without even realizing it? The scariest part of all this is that many times we don't even realize what's happening. Machiavellian influence doesn't arrive aggressively, yelling or demanding. It comes quietly, subtly. It installs itself little by little, like a fog that clouds your vision and changes the way you see yourself and others. Constant exposure to these tactics, such as gaslighting, triangulation, mirroring, and strategic silence, starts to mess with your mind. You begin to doubt yourself. You question your decisions, your memories, even your feelings. What once felt like certainty becomes doubt. And what was once doubt turns into complete confusion. This is the psychological effect of Machiavellian influence. It silently and effectively erodes your self-confidence. Suddenly, you no longer know if you're overreacting, if you're right or wrong, if you're the problem. And that's exactly where the manipulator wants to place you, in a state of vulnerability where they have all the control. This form of manipulation isn't new. Over 500 years ago, Niccolo Machiavelli already stated that controlling people's emotions and perceptions was one of the most powerful weapons for anyone seeking to stay in power. In his book, The Prince, Machiavelli explained that physical domination isn't enough. One must dominate the mind. And to achieve that, deceiving, manipulating, and lying were perfectly valid tools. These Machiavellian ideas have spread far beyond politics over the centuries. Today, this kind of influence happens in romantic relationships, friendships, workplaces, and even on social media. And the worst part? It's so subtle that most people only realize it once they're already emotionally drained. When someone uses these tactics on you, you gradually lose clarity. You start to believe you're making your own choices, when in reality, you're being carefully led, step by step, by someone else. And because everything is done with emotional intelligence, with compliments, with attention, with fake displays of affection, it becomes even harder to detect. Have you ever felt guilty for something you didn't do, just because someone insisted so much that you started to believe it? Have you ever changed the way you think or act just to please someone who always seemed to be right? Have you ever felt like, without realizing it, you were living someone else's life, not your own? These are clear signs that you may have been a victim of Machiavellian influence. After understanding how these Machiavellian strategies work, the question remains, how do you protect yourself? With awareness and knowledge, you can build a strong barrier against this type of manipulation. Step 1. Learn to identify manipulative patterns. If someone is constantly trying to confuse you, make you doubt yourself, or behaves in a calculated way to get something from you, be alert. That could be a sign of Machiavellian behavior. Be suspicious of exaggerated compliments. Machiavelli already said that appearances can be used as weapons. People with this profile know how to use sweet words and charm as tools of control. If someone suddenly changes their behavior, being extremely kind one moment and cold the next, ask yourself why. Study Machiavellian leadership. This type of leadership doesn't inspire, it dominates. These are leaders who don't care about the well-being of the team, only about the power they hold. They know how to manipulate through authority, and if you don't recognize it in time, you'll end up just another piece in their game. Develop your emotional intelligence. People who are emotionally aware can sense when something's off. They know themselves well enough not to be easily manipulated. Emotional intelligence works like an invisible shield. The stronger it is, the harder it is for someone to control you. Knowledge is your greatest defense. Machiavelli believed that power belongs to those who understand the game. Well, now, you understand it. These Machiavellian strategies aren't just movie plots or outdated ideas from an old book. They're real. They're being used right now in silence against you, against all of us. Machiavelli believed that whoever controls people's minds controls everything, and that's exactly what many are doing today, without us even realizing it. But now you know what's going on, and when you know the rules of the game, you stop being a pawn and start playing on equal footing. If this video helped you see what once went unnoticed, leave a like. That simple action shows you value content that awakens and strengthens you. And of course, share this with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe to the channel to keep receiving the truths that few dare to reveal.